Hi, in this video we'll be looking at custom formatting of reports in the web channel. You can see here I've got a dashboard and the values are shown in red or green, and there are icons denoting whether the values are going up or down. And for this training exercise I've created a cut down dashboard that touches on the various aspects of formatting. You can see here I've got a sales report that's showing profits, and there are some triangles that compare the current period with the previous period. So the triangle will go up or down depending on whether the profits are moving. There's also an icon that shows the ranking of the profit. For example, anything over 40% is green and below 30% is red. Then we have some highlighting of rows. So we have this row here in red because the profits are below 30%. Then we have other examples where we're showing values with different colored backgrounds, and again red and green depending on the value, being negative or positive, and some gauges. Towards the end of the video we'll be looking at a more complex scenario where we're using dynamic columns, for example customers by period, and these columns are comparing the values with the previous period, and if the values are up or down the color is red or green. Before we start the exercise, let's have a look at Publisher where these reports were created. So the very first dashboard we have the sales and profits. Let's have a quick look at how this report was done in Publisher. We open it in Query Builder, and you can see that it's using a product called SAP Business One for this exercise, but all the principles will apply to whatever product you wish to use. So to make the custom formatting appear for the triangles, you'll see that there's an expression here and it's comparing the profit percentage with the previous profit percentage, and then it's displaying a triangle up or triangle down. So these are using icons, and the ranking, which is the next one across, is doing something similar, but there are more conditions. So we're using a switch statement, and there's the first condition: if the gross profit is above 40%, above 35%, above 30%, and it's showing different icons. And then for the background color down the bottom here we have a expression that's looking at the gross profit again, and if that condition's true, we're, instead of setting an icon, changing the background color to a particular shade of red. Otherwise we're doing nothing. So this will be the first part of the training. So let's close this report and build it up from scratch. So you'll need to go to Publisher and select New, and we'll create a group called Train F3, and the code for the report will be sales. Click on Edit Query and just check that the mode for the report is Summary Report. From the product list, choose the product that you'd like to report out of. I'm using SAP Business One in this case, and the company I'll want to use is the UK company. Because I'm doing profits, I'm looking for a table that will give me the best data for profits, and I'm using the sales AR table in this case, and then from there I'm choosing the sales invoices. Okay, well the first column that I need is the period, so I'm going to drag that into the outputs. Then I need the line total, so if I do a search, line total, there's our total, and then I want the gross profit, so I'll do a search for gross, and you can see I found a column called gross profit. Okay, let's have a look at the data as it is at this moment. This is a demonstration database, so I've got data back in 2006. Right, the first thing I want to do is actually calculate the gross profit percentage, so I'll derive that from these two columns. So let's create an expression, and we'll divide from the current row the gross profit divided by line total. Now if the line total was 0, we could get a divide by 0 error in this particular instance, so I just want to add a little function that will protect against that. So if I did a search for divide safe, you can see there's a function here that's going to protect us from divide by 0 errors. So I'll just type that in, divide, and then I'll put a comma here and close the function. Okay, let's preview that data, and because we're dividing the one by the other, we're getting we're getting numbers between 0 and 1. So I'll just go back and change the data type to percentage, and the next thing I'll do is give that a nice name. So this will be profit. Okay, now that we've got the data for the report, the first step was to put the triangle in so that it was up or down when we compare with the previous period. So it'll be in this column here, and we want to compare this value with the previous value. Let's go back to the outputs and right click and select expression. Because we're dealing with custom formatting, let's go to the formatting folder in the functions list. There are various templates in here based on the most commonly used patterns, and you can see that there's one here called display triangle green up and red down. If I couldn't find this, I could always do a search for triangle and it'll come up with the same template. Let's double click on this and you'll see that it's come up with the template, and the important part is condition goes here. This is where we need to put our condition. So I'm just going to delete that and start entering in my condition. Here is those icons, so triangle up and down. So for the condition, what I need to do is take the current value and compare it with the previous value. And you can see there are folders called current row and previous row. So let's take the line total from the current row and say that if it's greater than the line total from the previous row, then we want to do a triangle up, otherwise it's down. Let's press OK. This prompt is asking us if we want to change the data type to icon, so you say yes to that. And if we preview the report, there's our triangles. Now you may notice that on the very first row, the triangle really doesn't make sense because we're comparing with nothing. So let's add another condition in there to say if it's the start of the report, don't bother putting the triangle in at all. So go back to the expression, and what we'll do is we'll add another if statement around this. So if I go if and do a search on start of report, you can see that there's a variable that's already created for us. So I'll double click on that. So if it's the start of the report, what we'd like to do is nothing at all. Otherwise, we'll do this statement here with the triangles. And then we'll close the bracket. And the last step is, of course, to give this column a nice description. So I'll call this move for movement. And if we preview the report, you can see now the first triangle has gone. Okay, let's move on to the next variation of this, where we actually grade the percentage based on icons from green to red. On the very end, let's add another expression. Now, because this expression is going to be feeding off the profit percentage, you'll need to go after it. So I'm adding the expression, and if we go back to formatting, you'll see that there's a template where we've got a whole range of colors for the icons. So let's use that template, and here we have the basis and we've got various conditions. So it's using a switch statement, and that way we can put in as many conditions as we like. So here's our green icon. We actually want the green to be at the top, so I'm just going to copy paste that, and let's put in our condition. So the condition is, we come back to our current rows, we'd like to take the percentage, which is this column here, and we'll say that if the percentage is greater or equal to 0.40, then it's green. We'll copy that and we'll repeat that condition for the next level, which is 35%, and yellow will be 30%, And we have further colors that we could use, but I'd like to just, from this point, if it's below for 30%, just show the default icon, which is status red. Press OK now, and just as we saw before, it's detected that the data type really shouldn't be decimal, it should be an icon, so we'll say yes to that. And I'll rename this column and call it rank. And we'll preview the data, and there's our icons. So the percentages that are over 40% are green, and here we have 27% with a red icon. Now in the demo we had anything that was below 30% with a row color of red, so that'll be the next stage. Let's go back to the outputs and we'll add another expression, and this expression will be a little bit different from the previous two in that it's not showing an icon, it's actually changing the background row color, and that'll be the next one on the list here. So conditional row background color. Let's click on that, and just as we saw before, we have a condition and then we have the actions, true and false. So this format's a little bit different, so we start with format and then we've got B color, and then the columns, so 0, 0 means all the columns on the row. Now if I wanted to do just column 3 to column 4, I would do this, and then we have the color. So there's various ways we can specify the colors. There are a set of common colors like red, green, blue, for example, so we could just type in their names, or we could go to the HTML colors where we can tune the color right down to a particular gradient. So let's enter in the criteria for this, and the criteria was if the percentage was below 30%. So let's select our percentage column and put in our comparison operator, which is below 0.30. Press OK. Now this expression is just doing formatting, so we really don't want to see it in its own right, so for that reason it's just saying we should really hide that, so that's why it's grayed out. So let's preview it, and you can see that the percentage below 30% is now red and everything else is green. We wanted to just set that to red and leave everything else, so we'll go back and change that criteria. So we'll edit the expression again. So if it's below 30%, we'll set it to red, otherwise we'll do nothing at all. And that red color was very dark. We'd like to get a better shade of red. Now there's various ways we can pick up the shades. One way is to actually go to a date picker in the web. So here we've got a web page. I've just done a Google search for HTML colors, color picker, and you can see here we can choose the shade of red that we're after. So we can tell it's a HTML color because it has a hash on the front and then it's got 6 coded letters. If I was after this shade of red, I'll just copy that and come back to the query and replace the keyword red with that hash color. Press OK and I'll preview it, and now we've got this different shade of red. I'd like to just change this one more time so that instead of doing the full row, I'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, column 5 by itself, just so we can see what that's doing. So column 5 to column 5, and we preview it, and now we've just changed the background color on one column. There are other ways in which we can get the colors for the background. I'll just show you those. So if we go back to Publisher and go to the Report tab, there's a section called Custom Styles and Colors. So if we enable that, we can create our own color palettes from here. So into the color picker and define your own color. And that's the hash color that you could use in the expression for a particular shade of color. Okay, let's go back to the report, and what I'd like to do next is add some complications by putting in subtotals. So currently we have the period, and what I'd like to do is put out a total when the period year changes. So let's have a look at this. So I need to get the year, and in this particular system it's in a folder called Financial Periods, and down the bottom here we have something called year. So I'll just put that into the output list and preview the report. Okay, you can see that conditional formatting for the column number has now gone onto the icon because we've added another column. There is a variable that we could use so that we could make that conditional formatting relative to where we are now. So we could say the current column -1, for example, and that would get around this problem where the columns are changing. Go back to the outputs, and just so I don't need to adjust that expression, I'm going to put the year at the end and double click on it, and we'll go to the sorting options. So we'd like to have the year appear first and then the period, and because we want a total to appear by year, we'll put out this, we'll set basic totals for that year. Press OK, and we'll preview the report, and now you can see that here's our year, and every time the year changes we're getting a total thrown out. The interesting thing about these totals is that for the percentage, what it's done is actually averaged the percentages above that total row. And really what we want to do is say that we want to divide these two figures together to get a more accurate percentage. So we'll need to fix that up, and also we'd like the icon that ranks the percentage to also appear on the total row. So we need to go back and actually put in a hint to say we'd like to do these types of calculations on the subtotals and the total rows. So let's have a look at the percentage. So we're dividing the two values together, and what I'm going to do is wrap a function around this to say that this expression should be applied to the subtotal or total row as well. So I'm just going to do a search on the word include, and it comes up with this include total rows. Double click on it. We'll just take out that example and put in the closing bracket. So what this will say is this expression should also be applied to the total rows. So now when we preview the report, we have a different figure appearing in the percentages. So if I was to do this, that was the original value, but now we're dividing those two. So well, let's now do that to the icon as well. The icon was here, and around that switch statement we'll put the include statement and preview the data. And even though we've done the include, the icon is still not appearing in the total row or the subtotal row. This is because icons aren't numbers, so it really doesn't make sense to put that on a total row. So we need to force it out by going to the totaling options. So I've just come back into the expression, and if we go to the General tab, there's a total row auto setting here. So automatically it knows never to put icons on the total row, but we'll just say do a count, but this will be overridden by the expression, and that way it'll force the icon to come out. So here's our icon now on the subtotal rows. The next item is that we'd like to hide the year that's on the side here, and we'd like to put some text into these cells here to say that this is the subtotal for year 2006-2007. Come back to the report and right click on the year, and we'll hide that, and the next one will be the expression that sets the text if it's a subtotal row. So we come back into formatting, and if we have a look at the list, there's setting font sizes, background colors, underlines, hiding rows, and right down the bottom here we have cell set content. So let's double click on that, and you can see that we've got our expression again, and then we've got column text, and column 1 to column 1 we'll set to ABC, otherwise it's XYZ. So this is what we require. Now how are we going to detect that it's a subtotal row? Well, I'll just delete this condition and I'll do a search for total, and from the selection list you'll find that there is one called is the row a total or subtotal row. So this is going to tell us, and if it returns 0 it means it's just a normal row, and if it's a grand total it'll be 1, and if it's a subtotal it'll be 2 onwards. So this will be the function that we require. So I'll just double click on that. So there's our total row level. So I'd like to go for number 2, and if that's true I'll set the column text in column 1 to ABC, otherwise I'll do nothing at all. Now if I run this at this stage, it will do nothing at all, because we still need to put that wrapper around it saying that this expression must be applied to, also applied to total rows. Let's go back and do a search for include, wrap that around this whole expression. Okay, and it's detecting that it's for conditional formatting, so it should be hidden. I'll preview that data, and now we have ABC in that first column. Now one of the problems with hiding the expressions is if you've got a syntax error, you won't be able to see the error message. So I'll just go back to that expression that we're working on, and what I'll do is I'll put in another comma here so that this is actually, the syntax will be broken. So if I preview the report again, there's no longer ABC here, and we've really got no indication of why it went wrong. So for those scenarios, just unhide the expression and you'll be able to see, okay, we've got an extra comma here and that needs to be fixed up. So that's one helpful technique when dealing with conditional formatting. Okay, I'll take out that extra comma, and now we'll set the text to something more meaningful. So I'll put in S total space, and then I'll put the value for the year on the end. So from our current row I'll select the year, press OK. I'll rehide that column, and there we have the subtotal for the year appearing in that column. Now that the report's just about finished, we'll press OK and apply, and we can go to the links and view it in the web. So I'll copy the link to the report and go to a new tab, and up the top here we've got our prompts. We can adjust the formatting of these prompts. At the moment they're just lined up, and we submit the report, and there's our report. Before we move on to the other variations of formatting, what I'd like to discuss now is if we're using the page designer, because the page designer deals with custom formatting in a slightly different way. So let's go back to that report, and if you go to the page tab and click on edit, and we'll just submit that, we'll get a page designer layout. This is very similar to Crystal reports or Actor reports or Microsoft reporting services, in that we've got a series of controls and we can drop fields onto the layout in a very flexible manner. Let's preview the data in this style of report, and you can see that the icons have come through, but the percentage, we need to fix that up ourselves, and also when the percentage drop below 30%, we need to actually set that background color ourselves using a different technique. So let's go back to the designer and go to the percentage cell, and the first thing we need to do is look at the properties for that cell. So at the moment it's being formatted as a number, which is this format N. If we change that to a P, it'll now format it as a percentage. So that was the first step. The next one is to look at the background color. Now the designer can bind the expression to any property, or almost any property, in the object property grid. You can see that there's already a expression on the background color, and if we have a look at that, instead of setting the colors to a constant, we go to the expression. What it's saying is that every odd number of rows, let's set the background color to this, otherwise it's transparent. Let's modify this expression, and so I'll just take out the current condition and we'll add in our own. On the left hand side here we have the fields, and what we can do is go for the profit percentage. I just double clicked on that, it's put it on the end, so we'll just put it back up into this conditional area and say that if that's smaller than 0.3%, we'd like to do this color, otherwise this color. I'll choose our particular shade of red that we used before, so just copy that and paste it into this true condition. Press OK, and if we preview the report, now we have the color changed depending on the percentage. So the designer has a different approach to custom formatting. So now we're ready to move on to the second part of the training, which is doing these numbers here that are changing colors depending on whether they're negative or positive. So there's two variations of this. We just have the red background with a yellow font color, and then we have a more complicated scenario where we're also displaying a up and down triangle. So let's start this report. Go back to Publisher and click New, and we'll assign it to the same group that we were using before, Training F3. And in here, we'll call this one KPI 1 and go to Edit Query. Now normally what you would do here is you would set the mode to aggregation or summary report and target that KPI that you're after. Now if I was to use SAP Business One for this, I would probably get a number that would not change, and for the demonstration I need numbers that will change so we can test negative and positive numbers. So what I'll do is I'll just use system and the company name, and I'll create an expression that will produce a random number. Again, normally you wouldn't do this, you would actually do a real query that hunted down a particular KPI and returned it. So let's add the expression and we'll do a find for random. With random numbers you can specify the minimum and maximum number. So I'd like numbers between minus 100,000 to 100,000. I'm going to give this expression a description and I'm going to call it KPI value. So if we preview that, there's our first column which we're not using, and there's our random number which I've called KPI value. So I'm just going to hide that first column, and now we'll create the expression that will change the colors depending on negative or positive numbers. So edit the expression, and if we come into formatting again, what I'd like to do now is choose one that does the background color and the fore color of the cell. So here's a template that does the background color and the fore color. This template's a little bit different from the others in that it's using the background color, but in addition it puts a pipe, which means there's more than one condition to apply here, and then we've got the fore color. So we can add as many of these different attributes as we see fit. Let's change the condition to detect whether it's a positive or negative value. So we'll look at the KPI and say that if it's below 0, then we'd like to do this, otherwise we'd like to do that. So when the values are positive, what I'd like to do is not change the background color at all. I'll just leave that white, and I'll just change the foreground color, the font color, to green. Okay, let's preview that. Now I'm currently highlighting the cell, so I just need to click off it and it's green, and if I run that again and keep on running it, eventually I'll get to a negative number as well. So there's the colors. So let's press OK to this and apply and copy the link to the report, because there's some additional settings that we need to apply to make that font size larger, etc. So at the moment the report's quite cluttered. It's got a title up the top, we don't need that, and we've got columns, totals, and borders, etc. So we need to really clean that up and just leave the numbers by themselves. So that'll be the next step. Go back to Publisher, and if you go to the Tables tab, there are a lot of options in here. So let's start with removing the title and the description. Remove the borders, column borders, and we'll remove any padding around that table. So I'll just turn that one on and go off row selection. I'm turning off a lot of the settings related to borders. Apply that and see what it looks like at this stage. Okay, so we still have the total at the bottom, and we also need to increase the font size. We could use conditional formatting to increase the font size as well, but in this case let's just go for the overall table default font size and increase that to 48 and remove the total at the bottom. Press apply. Okay, that's looking much better. The next thing we need to do is get rid of the decimal places on that number. So I'll go back into the query and I'll look at the KPI value. If I go to the options, there's a formatting tab over on the last tab. So we can customize that, and here's our number of places. Now funny enough, in here we could have changed the color of the number based on negative or positive values, but for this exercise we're using expressions to do that. So now we have two reports, a KPI and that profit report. We can start building up a dashboard and putting that content in, and as we work through the training exercise we'll add more and more of those reports into the dashboard. Let's go to the main index page for Sharperlight in the web channel and go to the Dashboards tab. The idea with dashboards is that you publish reports and then you can create a dashboard with tiles and reference that content in the tiles, and those dashboards themselves could be referenced from other reports. Click on New, and we're allocated a dashboard number, and I'd like to change that code for the dashboard. I'll call this training F3, and if I go to the tile, so the first tile that we create, I want it to be sales profits, and we'll just click on save. So at the moment the tile doesn't have any content. This will be that first report, so it's quite long, so I'm just going to drag the tile to make sure there's plenty of room to display the content, and we'll go back into the cog icon, which will allow us to set the properties behind the tile. Go to the content URL, and from the list select Publisher, and then scroll down to the Train F3 folder that we created, and we have two reports here. So we've got the KPI 1 and sales, and for this particular case I'd like to allow them to change the filter criteria for that report. So I'm just going to say look with prompts, and we'll display the table. Now you can see that it's got prompts and there's quite a few of them there, so we really want to stack that up, and we don't want to wait for the submit button, so we'll submit by default, and also we want that prompt area up the top here to collapse up so we've got more room for the report. So let's have a look at those settings in Publisher. Go back to Publisher and our first report, which was sales, and if you go to the report tab, you can see there's some options here dealing with prompts. So the first one is submit by default. We'll click on that, and the behavior will be we want to collapse it after submit, and I really want these prompts values to be nicely aligned, so I'll say let's put 1 per row. I'll apply that and we'll refresh this page. Okay, so there's our prompts, and they've been collapsed by default, and if we open them up we can change them and then resubmit the report. The next thing of course is to get rid of this title up the top. So if we go to the table tab, we can remove show title. Good. Now let's create another tile over here for the KPIs. So I'll go back into the settings and click on new tile, and this one I'll call it KPI Department 1, and the content will be the KPI report. Now I have a choice to show prompts. If there were prompts, we really don't want to change them. We just want to go straight to the table without any prompting. So that's why I'm going to the without prompts folder. So there it is there. It's appeared down the bottom. Let's just drag that and put it beside the first report and adjust the size. Now when you adjust the size for these reports, you just need to go back into the settings and save again, otherwise it won't record the position. Now the KPI, we need to put a timer in there so that every few minutes or every few seconds it'll go away and read those values, just in case this dashboard's sitting up on a screen somewhere and we want it to regularly update. So let's do that. We'll go back to Publisher, and we'll go to our KPI report. And if you go to the Tables tab, there's a setting called Page Refresh every few seconds. So in here I'll put in 10 and press Apply. Now run the report. There's our value, and in a few seconds we should see that go away and refresh again. Okay, so there's one version of the KPI where we're changing the color of the background and the foreground. The next one is we'll go into another variation where we're doing custom HTML to do the formatting. So let's go back to Publisher, and what we'll do is we'll clone the KPI1 report and we'll modify that for the second version of this. So let's call this KPI2, and if we edit the query, there's our random number. We'll reuse that, and instead of using this expression where we're changing the background and foreground color, we'll do a HTML version of this. So I'll delete that expression and add a new expression, and instead of going to formatting, let's go into HTML, and the one that we're after is under a folder called Custom Styles. Under Custom Styles, select large font size, red and green, up and down arrow. So this template's using HTML, so there's a div statement and it's saying align it right and set the font size to 30 pixels. So let's just make that slightly larger, 50 pixels, and then we have our value goes here. So there's our condition, very similar to the previous expressions, but we're dealing with HTML. So if the condition is smaller than 0, we'll do this. So we can put our own value in there, otherwise we'll do the positive value. So let's swap out the your value goes here part with our random number, which is under current row. So there's our KPI value, and we'll also put that KPI value in here as well. Press OK, and you can see that it knows that this is HTML, so it's asking that we change the data type to HTML, so we'll say yes to that. And if we preview that report, you can see there's our KPI and there's the HTML. In the preview, the HTML will just be shown as it is, but when we go back into the browser, we'll see what it looks like for real. So I'm just going to press OK there and apply and copy the link to that report. And you can see there's the raw value and there's the value that's been done in HTML. So we really want to hide that first value there. Because we cloned the first report, it's got that 10-second interval refresh. So go back to the report and we'll hide the KPI, and we'll just change this expression to say KPI value to. Press OK and apply, and now we'll go back to that dashboard that we were working on. So now we're back at the dashboard, and we'll add a new tile. So new tile, and this will be, the title will be KPI Department 2. And the content will reference that report that we've just created. Press save, and we'll drag that. You notice that the number doesn't have a comma in it, so we need to really go back and add some custom formatting to that number. And have a look at the HTML that we created earlier, and there's our value with the up and down triangle. So to customize the formatting of that number, if I do a search on format, there's various templates showing number formatting. So it's this one here that I'm after, format with a hash. I'm just going to type that in. So format, and then in quotes I'll have hash, comma, hash, hash, 0, close quote, comma, and print the closing bracket on the end. And we'll do the same for the negative values, or do the same for the positive values as well. And we can save that and come back to the dashboard and just refresh it. Okay, we're ready for the next stage of this training exercise, where we're going to take that number and show it in a gauge just down here. So let's go back to Publisher, and we'll clone that report yet again, and we'll call the report KPI number 3. Go into the query, and we'll use our random number again, but because we're dealing with a gauge, we don't want to put very large numbers in there. We'll rescale that random number to go from 0 to 1000 for this exercise. So I've changed the min and max value there. We'll delete the expression that we had before for displaying the value, and we'll create a new one. So add expressions. Let's go to the HTML folder, and under HTML you can see that we've got things like gauges, sparkle lines, bars, etc. So we'd like to go to the gauges folder, and here you can see under gauges yet again we've got lines, LEDs, but I'd like to choose the first one from the list for this exercise. So it'll just give us a basic gauge. So this is gauge number 3, and we'll shortly see what it looks like. Again, it's HTML, and there are various parameters in here. So I can see that min, max, so I'd like to change that max to 1000, and the ticks will be every 100 units. And here's where I put my value, so I'll delete that and replace it with our random number that we generated before. And I can also put in a title, so I'd like to actually show the value that we're generating, so I'll put that in the title. And here we've got the yellow zone, so if it's 700, and the red zone will be from 900 onwards. These values could reference something in your report. They don't need to be hard-coded at all. And here we've got the width and the height. So I'll just make the width a little bit larger and press OK. If I preview the report, there's the HTML, so there's no expression errors there. And press OK and apply. Come back to our dashboard, and we'll add another tile. Press new tile, and this will be KPI Department 3. And just as we've done before, we'll reference the report from the published list. And we'll drag the tile up and just give it some extra size. I think I made that a little bit too large, so if I went back into that expression, I could make that gauge a little bit narrower. The gauges won't adjust themselves to the size of the tile. You'll need to actually do that inside the expression itself. So let's go back and say the width should be really 200 and save that. Now I tried various widths on that gauge to get it to fill that tile better. So I moved from 260 pixels wide to 200, and then it became too small, and now I've put it back to 230, and it's just filled the tile size quite nicely. Now we're ready to move into the final part of the training where we look at dynamic columns. So here we have values for customers by period, and what we're doing is comparing the value with the previous period, and if the value goes down it's red, and if it goes up it's green. Dynamic columns are interesting in that we don't really know how many there will be in some cases. So in this case there's periods that will always be 12, but it could be departments or cost centers going across the top. So when we do the conditional formatting, we need to understand where we are in the list, and you can see here that if we're in the first value in the list, there's really nothing to compare with. So the conditional statements will be a little bit more complex than the previous examples. Let's have a look at this report in Publisher. So the report's using SAP Business One and the sales table, and you can see here we have the customer code, the name, and the value, and the period's been bound to the value so that we get the value repeated for each period, and then we have an expression. The expression will look something like this, where we've got our include on total rows, so that this row here gets the formatting applied to it as well, and then we have some functions that detect whether we're on the first column of the dynamic range, and then we have these background color sets and relative to where we are, so column index -1. Okay, so let's start building this report up and see what happens. So from Publisher, select New, and we'll choose the same group as we had for the other reports, so Training F3, and the report code will be Sales by Customer. The title will be Sales by Customer again. Edit the query, and from the just check that the query mode set to summary report, and from the product list choose your product that you wish to report out of. I'm using SAP Business One again, and I'm setting my company to UK, and I've chosen the sales table from this particular system. Okay, so the first columns I'd like to get are the customer code and name, so I'm going to do a search for customer, and here we have the code, the name, and then I'd like to get the line total. So I'll output that, and I'll drag the filters into the outputs as well, so we can see the periods on which the data falls into. So there's our customer code, name, period, and there's the amount. So the next stage is to make a dynamic column report. So we want to bind these periods to the line total. So the period 1 to 12 will be going across the top here. And so we'll go back to the report, and where we've got the filter on the period, let's define the range carefully. So I have a demonstration database, so I need to go back in time a few years to the year 2006. So I'm just going to say -9 years, and the same here. And I'd like to get a full year, so we've gone back based on the current period, which is 2015 at the moment. We've gone back 9 years, and then we'll go to options and say start of the year, and the to value will be end of year, so we get a full 12 months for that range. So this period filter has a name. I'll just have a look at the name of that, which is year period code. We could change this, but I'll just leave it with the auto code that was assigned to it. Next we'll come to the outputs, and we'll remove the period from the outputs because now we're binding it to the line total. Double click on line total, and where it says apply filters to this output, we'll select that period filter and come down and select dynamic outputs. Okay, we've created our dynamic output, and you can see here on the side it's saying that this period filter will be applied to line total. Okay, let's preview it. And there's our periods going across the top and our values down. Okay, the next step is to create an expression now that's going to look at these values and do the comparisons. Before we go into that complex expression that we saw earlier, we'll just do a simpler version first so we can understand what's going on with dynamic columns. So I'm going to add a new expression. I'll just multiply the current value by 2. So I'll go to current row, there's our line total, and I'll multiply that by 2. Now this is very important, that if we do a expression and we also want it to be part of the dynamic columns, we need to apply that filter to the expression as well, otherwise it'll be outside that range. So I'll just double click on that, and if we go to the functions list, there's our filter, click on it and make it dynamic as well. Okay, let's preview that. So there's our expression, and it's multiplying that by 2, and it's repeated for each period as well. Okay, so let's change that expression now to be that more complicated scenario, and we'll change it now to be this expression. I'll just go through it one more time to explain what's going on. So we understand what include total rows does. It means that the expression should also apply to the totals, and we've got the switch statement, which we've dealt with in the previous examples, and then we've got some special functions here that will tell us what is the index position of the dynamic columns. So if it's the first one in the list, it'll be 0, and if it's the first one in the list, we really don't have anything to compare with. So if we jump across and compare it with the previous column, we'll have a number, but the first one in the list will have nothing really to compare it with other than this description. So that's why we're saying if it's the first column, then basically set the background color to white and the foreground color to black. So there's that pipe that we saw earlier. Now what is new in this report is we're using relative columns. So this variable here called column index, so this column index will tell us where we are as far as columns are concerned, and if we -1, we'll get the column before. So the formatting is formatting the column just before it. The next conditions are saying, well, now we're into the dynamic columns. Now we can do comparisons with the previous value. So this line total comes from the current row, so that's the line total that's on the current column, and to get the previous column we need to use this expression here, which is looking at the current output index, and we're going across 3 back to get the value to compare with. And you may ask, why are we going back 3 columns to get the value? It's because this expression actually takes up a slot as well. So there's actually 2 values for each period. There will be the actual line total, and then there will be this expression. So to get the previous line total for the previous period, we need to go back 3 values. So let's press OK here. And just for this exercise, I'm going to say no, don't hide the expression, because we'd like to see what's going on. The expression, we've left it as decimal, so we really can't see the custom formatting that's happening, so we'll need to set that data type back to text and preview it again. And there's no syntax errors, so we're seeing format, back color, pipe, for color, and on the first dynamic column it did nothing at all, and then the second one it's actually changed those colors. So the next step would be to hide this formatter now, and then maybe fix up that label up the top there. Let's do that. So we'll hide that expression, and where it says line total, we'd like to take control over that description that's appearing at the top. So I'm going to customize the description, and if we come to the lookup list, there's a folder called Dynamic Output Labels, and what I'd like to do is just take the period and display it as it is and remove that word line total from the column. And preview that. Now that's looking much better. As we're getting towards the end now, I'd like to go back over and review what we've seen in the examples to date. So the first ones we're using a expression, and we'd put our condition in and it would show an icon up or down. And then we moved on to changing background colors and foreground colors. So again, expression, and if the condition is true, do this, otherwise do that. We also learnt about these hash colors, which are called HTML colors, that allow us to tune the color to be exactly what we want. But there were also colors, the basic colors, that had names as well. We also learnt that there was a variable called column index that allowed us to reference columns relative to where the expression is. So for example, if we wanted to modify the color of the column just before the expression, we could use column index -1. We also learnt that most of the custom formatting has column ranges, so 0, 0 would be the whole row, and if you wanted to go for a particular range of rows, you could do 3 to 5, for example. But if you were to use this constant reference version of the columns, if you add and move things around, obviously it's going to set the color of the wrong values. So these column indexes are quite helpful. There were other options that we didn't see in this training where we, for example, set the font color to bold. You could change the font size, the alignment, underlines, top and bottom, for example. We could also clear out the contents of a cell if for whatever reason you wanted to blank it out conditionally. And we did see setting of the text conditionally as well. And there's also hiding columns and hiding rows conditionally. So the columns would be in a particular scenario where a whole column is irrelevant, you could take that out, but depending on the filter parameters, it may come back in. We also saw that in addition to changing colors and displaying icons, we could go into HTML as well and take full control over the display of the content. And we saw that in Page Designer there was a different approach to applying those expressions, where the property grid, where it has colors, for example, we could define an expression that controls the value that's applied to that particular property. So this video touches on some of the key points of conditional formatting in the web channel, and there are videos that cover some of these report styles in more detail, for example the dynamic columns. There is another approach to custom formatting that can be applied in Excel, but this video has just been focusing on the web channel. That concludes conditional formatting in the web channel.